Well, good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here, and it's wonderful to see all of you here. And I'm on a mission to spread unlearning, and that's why I'm here. And by the end of this session, I hope that you would have been inspired to explore unlearning, not just in theory, but in practice. I will be demonstrating a simulation of unlearning because I trained ChatGPT AI how to unlearn. Now my AI, ChatGPT cannot learn. And also, at the end of the session, I might not be able to cover everything. So I've uploaded materials, including a practical guide if you want to start facilitating and learning yourself. And there'll be a QR code right at the end of my presentation. So if I go very fast, don't worry, you'll have the whole presentation uploaded on the website. So I'll be covering, of course, introducing unlearning myself and how I came about this, and also just removing the water. So I'd like to see all your faces without obstruction. And I'll be introducing a framework for transformative education towards flourishing futures and sustainable futures. And of course, the application, limitations, and an invitation for you to continue to explore it and perhaps consider it for your research, because unlearning encompasses very different disciplines. So who am I? This is just to share with you my backstory. Go very quickly. So I've come from different places. I'm originally from the Philippines, but I've lived in 4 different continents, 7 different countries, and I've worked with more than 30 plus organizations as a leader, as a consultant, and also as a facilitator and educator for change. So my global footprint is quite extensive. Also that this required me to be very cross-disciplinary, because when I do change management, organizational development, I have to learn about different types of changes, including from restructuring organizations to innovation, adoption of new technology. So what this has created for me is a journey of unlearning and deepened my libertarian values for freedom and flourishing, expanded my field from psychology change management to social change. And essentially, I'm a pragmatic social constructivist. I'm not a positivist, and that's reflected in the way I approach research. And also, I adopt complex adaptive systems and ecological systems worldview. That's Breffen, ecological systems theory by Breffen Brenner. So with all this journey, I've gone through so many different crises from the time I was born as a martial law baby in the Philippines. And this has created a lot of transformative dissonance for me. Yesterday, there was a presentation on cognitive dissonance. And this for me has triggered the curiosity of what if what we have been adopting, internalizing, normalizing are not useful and are actually harmful for us, for our flourishing. So despite the education I've had, international master field education for social change, where we have been inundated with transformative education, I realized it's not enough, and I've lived through this. Because transformative education lacks the connection between an individual focus with a systemic focus on transformation. We cannot transform as individuals without having an impact and being impacted by what's going on around us. And it's also a linear process, but it's not, learning and unlearning is not linear. Transformation is not linear. It's sometimes emergent because the world is complex, and the approach can sometimes be fragmented and siloed. It's just to say in the discipline of education, where transformation actually encompasses multiple disciplines. It's interdisciplinary. So why are we still facing intensifying poly crisis then, if we've had transformative education for decades now? Key thing here is, what is the real problem? Is for us to start naming the problem. On the surface, we see a lot of this poly crisis happening, right? But what is happening is actually because of what keeps happening. We seem to be repeating history, right? No, we've had World War I, World War II, now probably we're on the brink of World War III, and all this climate collapse that we're seeing, it's an ongoing problem. We've had Millennium Goals, then we've moved to Sustainable Development Goals, and we're still that close to achieving them. But what keeps making this happen are the systemic structures that don't change. But really, what's driving everything is the paradigms and mental models that we are coming from. So then the key question is, what if educators are complicit with all the poly crisis that's happening by reproducing the very paradigms that's actually sustaining the issues we're dealing with? So as Gloria Steinem said, the first problem for all of us is not to learn, but to unlearn. And Gregory Bateson, very much influenced by him. If you look at his work, he talks about 3 levels of change and learning. We are mostly governed by epistemologies that we know are wrong. So we are faced with disinformation, disconnectedness, misalignment, and all of the issues that this brings for us. So as Albert Einstein famously said, you cannot solve the problem with the same mindset that created it. And so that really inspired me to explore unlearning, because if what we've learned is not serving us, then obviously we have to unlearn it. So this, I won't go through every single detail, but this is just a theoretical frame for what I'm about to introduce next. That in my research on learning, interestingly enough, there is no comprehensive definition of it. That is all very surface. It's as though intuitively we know there's such a thing as unlearning, but then we dismiss it as though it doesn't exist. And so I've interviewed 9 transformative educators as thought leaders in their fields, from psychotherapy to linguistics, political science to business and entrepreneurship and futures thinking, from education, academia, and corporate. And essentially, as you can see, unlearning can be both adaptive and adverse. So it can have negative consequences and positive consequences. It can be conscious and unconscious. So the idea is to bring it to our awareness and be intentional about what happens with our learning. For example of adverse unlearning is me coming from the Philippines. We have a lot of indigenous and native wisdom that had been erased and also continues to be silenced. But now we're actually returning back to all those ancient old native wisdom. Like for example, in Australia, in managing the environment, now they are going back to the wisdom of the Aboriginals in how they manage bushfires and all of that. So now we're returning to what we have unlearned. So unlearning is not same or is a subset of learning. I've come across this, presented this concept in other conferences, and it's like there's this comment that, oh, is it unlearning just the same as learning? But that's the problem, because by subsuming it with learning, not recognizing unlearning as a concept on its own, then we don't focus on it, then we don't have our awareness around what we are unlearning. And worse, we don't develop the capabilities around it because we don't spend enough time and attention, and we don't foreground it how it actually impacts us. But the thing is, learning is happening all the time. Like for example, when we learn as babies, we learn to crawl, and then we learn to walk, right? So we've unlearned crawling, but it's temporary. We can always still learn to crawl. We can always say if there's an earthquake, we probably will intuitively crawl under the table, right? So learning and learning go hand in hand. And it's always happening. It's the intentionality around the learning that's missing. So this, I create the distinction. So the proposed definition of unlearning from my research is unlearning is the recalibration, the release, reconfiguration, or reconstruction of the usefulness and correctness of what is adopted, internalized, or normalized. So based on that, I've distilled 3 the QEA framework, 3 capabilities that helps enhance transformative education towards flourishing and sustainable futures. And some of these may not seem new because they are, as I said, already all naturally unlearned anyway. And some of these we have seen in other frameworks as well. So the first is questioning critically. And what that does is it surfaces our blind spots and paradigms. So there are different ways to question assumptions, narratives, and worldviews. It's not just asking about what, how, and why, but asking questions, who benefits and who gets to flourish? Because this presentation is about flourishing and sustainable futures, and that's a collective thing, it's not an individual thing. So who gets disadvantaged as well with whatever paradigms we push out there? And if we don't, we've learned a lot of tools, we've learned a lot of ways of how to educate, but if we don't go deeper and examine the paradigms we're coming from, that in itself can actually disadvantage, silence, or even sometimes it can be a bit violent in marginalizing some people. So it's also important to critically assess where is knowledge coming from, where are we coming from? Our identities and positionalities as educators and researchers is very important. That's why I started with that with my presentation. So engaging difference is about, it helps expand perception. disrupts habits of being. But it's not just mere exposure. It's not just mere immersion in multicultural activities. So one of my interviews, my research actually pointed that out to me because I thought from my experience, oh, I've been exposed to different cultures and that's actually helped me with transformation. But it's not always the case because she said, well, there was this case with Finland missionaries. They came to a country and instead of them learning or being unlearning the race, they imposed their race on the locals in a quite violent way. So sometimes we have to be very conscious of that when we're sitting on the table with diversity. Are we imposing our views or are we open enough to that diversity? So it's important to recognize how are we engaging with difference and are we truly embracing it with openness and with courage? Another one is activating alternative futures. This is about it. Models and mobilizes new realities with moral courage. Moral courage is very important. We have to have the moral imperative to unlearn. And there are tools around this, like the next presentation about futures and foresight. So future basing alternative models and maps, tools around like future games, simulations, systemic, I don't know if you've heard of systemic modeling, sensory linguistic modeling. These are ways in which you can activate alternative futures and simulate them and prepare different pathways. We cannot really truly predict the future. But we can test it. So this is just, I know it's tiny, but I wanted to go, I've been going fast because I wanted to show you this. I'm learning simulation by generative AI. So we've been talking a lot about AI, right? So this is about showing you how does AI then simulate what I've taught it to unlearn? Because I asked, can you unlearn? And then AI's response was, I cannot unlearn like humans do, but I can simulate unlearning, and that was based on the models we taught it. So I'll send you the presentation and you can have a look. So basically this one is unlearning the dominant assumption that, and you would have heard this over the last day, that AI will enhance learning by making it personalized, you know, and scalable and more efficient. So are we just accepting that as truth, or do we actually challenge it and potentially unlearn that? So then AI goes to, this is all AI, right? The prompt is just the gray text there. And then AI goes on to say initial frame, how to challenge the frame, disrupting the presuppositions there, recognizing what are the filters, reframing with unlearning mandala, which I showed you, and then embodied unlearning, the educator. And then it goes on to summarize what's the unlearning, now comparing the old logic with the new logic, what has been unlearned. And then it even shows here, closing reflection you could offer at the conference. So it says there, yeah. What if it's not about being smarter with tech, but what if it's about having deeper presence with our students as educators? Here's another one. This one is when I asked ChatGPT. So if another person with another ChatGPT account ask ChatGPT, can you unlearn? Will the response be the same? And I want to show this and share this with you because there's a lot of misconception about how we use AI and ChatGPT. It's actually very dialogical. And this is demonstrating to you that part of unlearning is also dialogical and how we dialogue with AI. And that's why, from my perspective, I view AI not just as a tool, but as it's almost like an agent I collaborate with, right? So then AI goes to say, my responses are shaped by you, right? And but the core truth stays the same, that delivery changes. And then it goes on to say what I've drawn from your work. So the very things that I just shared with you, the very framework, AI has already started using it and then implementing it. So I'm showing this to you that you also, as a human being, can do the same thing, but and just simulating with you how it's being used in practice by AI. So the same thing, if you have models and frameworks, you can then run it through AI and see, oh, how would this potentially be utilized? And then you also use multiple perspectives. So if you're a scientist, if you're an academic, if you're a practitioner, facilitator, corporate facilitator, adult educator in community, how are you going to use this model? So that's just something to think about. And then this is another unlearning simulation. I won't go through The important thing here is you see number 4, reframing through the unlearning mandala. So the 4 F's is actually a critical component of unlearning. So it shows you how AI simulated the unlearning using the 4 components of challenging the filters, the frames, the focus, and the fixedness of what we have learned. Okay, so recommendations. Again, you can simply start with prompting with critical questions like what I said, and then inviting diverse perspectives, but also be critical about how people are engaging with difference, ask them to reflect around that, and educator development, becoming and learning facilitators. I want to point out there the multidimensional reflexivity. So you can use the unlearning mandala to enhance your reflexivity, to look at the different components as you are experiencing unlearning. And policy innovation, same way, cultivating unlearning ecosystems. Again, the unlearning mandala is very comprehensive and it aids in auditing being performative. So if we're just trained to comply with things, are we truly engaged with transforming towards a flourishing future, or we're just doing, checklist compliance? So limitations and invitations. Unlearning is critical, and yet it's very much under research, and there's so much disagreement around it that, in fact, with the School of Psychology, the domain of psychology, they dismiss it. They say that if there's only learning, there's no such thing as unlearning, and I've already told you that it's very dangerous to assume there's no such thing as unlearning. So these are all the potential invitation to the comparative studies, action research, use and artificial intelligence for dialogical unlearning. And you can use the mandala as a diagnostic tool as well. And then unlearning intelligence, is there such a thing? And the other thing also is, if some of you are familiar with the Big 5 personality profiling, if you're high in openness, does that mean that you're more capable of learning? So correlating within personality profiling and capacity for learning and transformation. So essentially, in conclusion, Unlearning for Transformative Education Towards Flourishing and Sustainable Futures. How that it adds to transformative education is the model is multidimensional, it's contextual. That means what is learning and learning in one context that is useful might not be so useful and actually harmful in a different context. And it's temporal. That means what we unlearn today, we can learn again tomorrow, just like crawling, walking, riding, right? We have learned and unlearned different modalities of transformation. So conclusion, contribution to future of education using the unlearning mandala as a comprehensive theory, but more so within transformative education, to start simple with the QA framework, to question critically, to engage difference critically, and also to activate alternative futures, mainly through modeling, and then the emergent model by simulating with unlearning with AI. So as Rumi says, the highest form of learning is unlearning. And so thank you for your engagement. And these are the